For today's episode of Labyrinths, we're stepping outside the studio to bring you a live recording of Amanda discussing her new memoir, Free: My Search for Meaning. Recording from the Puget Sound Zen Center on Vashon Island, Washington, and in conversation with Voice of Vashon's very own Jeff Hoyt, Amanda offers an unflinching look at the lasting impact of wrongful conviction and the complex work of rebuilding a life in the public eye. She speaks openly about confronting trauma, navigating motherhood, and the surprising evolution of her relationship with the Italian prosecutor who once sought her conviction.
Feeling lost?
Then you're in the right place.
I'm Amanda Knox.
And I'm Christopher Robinson.
And this is Labyrinths.
I thought I would open by just telling you about the first time I ever encountered Amanda, the writer. Just before we met. And I appointed so many people to this column. She wrote a column in The Atlantic called Who Owns Amanda Knox? And basically she was calling out a Hollywood filmmaker for trading on her name without permission, which has happened many times. And he made a movie based on the Amanda Knox saga that pretty much perpetuated a variety of fictions that were the very things that wound up helping send Amanda to prison for 4 years. And yet, in this column, which I highly recommend you read, it's Who Owns Amanda Knox in The Atlantic, she didn't tear this guy a new one, even though he so deserved it. She just made her case. It was simple, it was reasonable, it was persuasive, calm, and devastatingly effective. But that's the Amanda that Cindy and I have come to know. Her superpowers are kindness and empathy. And it has opened her to receive the wisdom that is reflected and captured in this wonderful book. You can hold it up there. Ta-da. Free: My Search for Meaning. And we're going to dig all into that in just a couple of minutes here. And we'll answer your questions, sign copies of the book afterward. But first, Amanda's going to read a passage that she has especially selected just for you guys. So please welcome Amanda Knox.
The day after I was convicted of murder, I had the first epiphany of my life. I didn't know what an epiphany should feel like, but it was cold. Like a breeze blowing in and brushing the back of your neck, making your hairs stand up. Suddenly, I knew something deep down that I hadn't known before, and I spent the next several months peering into that epiphany, trying to consider all its implications, like watching the ripples spreading out from a drop in a pool of water. I silently swept a corridor of the cell block during my work shift. The word colpevole, guilty, echoing in my head. I overheard one agente, guard, say to another, "Poor thing, she doesn't understand what just happened." They thought, since I wasn't sobbing hysterically, that I hadn't absorbed the fact that I was going to spend the next 26 years trapped in this place. But I was quiet precisely because I was sitting with my epiphany. And it was this. I was not, as I had assumed for the past 2 years, waiting to get my life back. I was not a lost student waiting to go home. I was a prisoner, and prison was my home. I'd thought I was in limbo, awkwardly positioned between my life, the life that I should have been living, and someone else's life, the life of a murderer. I wasn't. I never had been. The conviction, the sentence, the prison, this was my life. There was no other life I should have been living. There was only my life, this life, unfolding before me. My first 2 years of prison, I believed my mom when she insisted that there was a light at the end of the tunnel, that the truth would win out, and the judge and the jury would see how absurd this entire debacle was. Now that tunnel was stretching out before me, so long that I could not even see a speck of light. Mom fought to remain optimistic. The tunnel was just longer than we'd thought, but we'd all get through it. We'd reach the other side. Even though I tried, I just couldn't see it that way. I had assumed that the truth would set me free. I now knew how wrong that was. The truth hadn't vindicated me in my first trial. Why should I expect it would do so in my appeal? The epiphany itself didn't feel good or bad. It was just true. If there was a feeling, it was the feeling of clarity. My life was sad. I was imprisoned for a crime I didn't commit. I would be locked away for the best years of my life. I would likely never fall in love, have children, or pursue a career. My world would be so small, trapped within concrete walls and surrounded by traumatized people, a fair number of whom were a danger to themselves and others. This life would inevitably take me further and further down a path that would alienate me from everyone I loved, who, despite their best efforts to stay connected to me, were on their own paths, moving in very different directions. But, and this was the crucial thing, the thing I hadn't been able to see until that moment, no matter how small, cruel, sad, and unfair this life was, it was my life. Mine to make meaning out of, mine to live to the best of my ability. There was no more waiting to live. There was only life, right here, right now.
We live in a world of grievance where everyone is trying to find someone to blame. And it would be so easy to just wallow in your misfortune. But at a very young age, you decided, no, you made this extremely mature decision to live the life that was handed to you and make the most of it. But there would be setbacks that would test your resolve. And that was happening both in prison and since you've been back. How hard was it to hold on to that acceptance that you were striving for?
That's a great question because you're right? Like there's a chapter in this book where I go to Burning Man, which you can imagine that chapter. But there's a moment in it where I visit what's called the temple at Burning Man people. We're on Vashon. Burning Man people. Oh, only one guy? Come on! You guys are basically living in Burning Man. It's fine. So famously in Burning Man, there's the big Burning Man. There's a guy that you burn at the end of this week. But there's another actual structure that you burn at Burning Man, and it's called the temple. And, when the man is burned, it's a wild party. Everyone's doing drugs. Everyone's flowing, like fires going around. It's a wild party. When the temple burns, everyone sits in the desert in silence and watches this structure burn to the ground. And this structure is very different than the man. It is a space that you can enter into and you leave mementos. I saw a wedding dress there. I saw someone carve into the wood, I raped someone. People confess things in the temple. It's a really powerful space that then people let go of when, whatever they leave there, they really truly let go of when it burns to the ground. And the thing that I left there when I went to Burning Man was a little painted thing that I made that just said, pain was easier in prison. I bring this story up because you mentioned setbacks. Obviously, prison is a setback. You are trapped in a cage and you cannot open that cage and your life opportunities are extremely limited. Even so, I found ways to have a meaningful life in prison. Oddly, be careful what you wish for. Like, I went to Italy to become a translator and an interpreter. And once I became fluent in Italian, I actually became the unofficial translator of the prison for all of the other prisoners who couldn't speak Italian. So weirdly, I actually sort of pretty easily found a place for myself in the prison once I sort of had that epiphany and accepted that this was my life and I had to make the best of it. It was after I got out and I entered freedom that I was suddenly catapulted into yet another existential crisis of, I had been fantasizing, all these years in prison of just being able to have my life back. And then when I came home, that life no longer existed. I was not the same person. The world was not the same towards me. I was being followed around and stalked and always viewed in the worst possible light. The stigma of being accused of a horrific crime just stayed with me. And it felt like everyone was always just waiting for an opportunity to tear me down. And even after I proved my innocence, I had to every day wake up and prove my innocence all over again. One of the big things that I write about in this book are the mistakes I made as a result of being put through that. As now looking back on it, I'm 37 now. I was 25 when I got out of prison. I had just spent 4 years in prison, entered when I was 20. And I don't know what you guys were doing during your 20s, but probably making a few mistakes. I was making mistakes, but my mistakes might have put me back into prison. And I was not allowed to make mistakes. I had to be invisible and I had to be perfect. And yet I made some devastating mistakes as a result of sort of flailing to find a sense of meaning in this world that didn't seem like it had a place for me. And I wanted to sort of honor that fact because I think that's actually a universal thing. That when somebody, you don't have to be someone who goes through a crazy wrongful conviction story in a foreign country to undergo trauma. And then because that trauma pulls out the rug from underneath you and you feel like everything you thought you could count on in the world is now in question, you start flailing and you start trying to grab onto anything that gives you a sense of control or a sense of belonging. And sometimes you grab onto the wrong person or the wrong thing, and it only buries you further. So to really the journey that I go on in this book is rediscovering that sense of okay, this is my life, this is what it is, and what can I do with it? And I think that I've now gotten to a place where I feel really comfortable and aware of what that looks like for me on a day-to-day basis. I'm very confident because I know how to be an effective agent in the world, but it was only because I found myself challenged over and over and over again and having people sort of talk to me as if they wanted to bury me. I was always told, and to this day, I'm promoting the book, book, and people are shut up and disappear already. And I struggled with that for a long time, but I do not feel confused about that today. And it's been a hard fought journey.
When you were in prison, you kind of learned Italian by reading Harry Potter.
Yes. I highly recommend that way, even though there's a lot of made-up words. Now that you think about it.
Which I love that because that was how you were able to then become a translator and to help people write letters to their family and become useful in prison.
Yeah.
But so you had access to books. And I was just curious what books you read while you were in prison beyond Harry Potter that had meaning for you, that helped you along with this determination to live the life that you were handed.
Yeah. So early on, the first book that I got my hands on was a dictionary. And then the second book that I got my hands on was Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire in Italian, because that's a stroke of luck that the prison library, which was really just a closet, had in the library. And so I just, having read that a million times already, not actually a million times, but like at least 5 times already. I was 11 when The Sorcerer's Stone came out, so I was kind of perfectly positioned to just be obsessed with Harry Potter for the rest of my life. And honestly, going through prison and being vilified in the media made me appreciate Harry Potter's journey even more. I'm gonna say, I feel like I can relate to Harry Potter way more than any other Muggle in the world. But anyway, so My Search for Meaning is the subtitle of this book, and that is a reference, a nod to Viktor Frankl's book. And I read that in prison. It was the closest thing that I had to How to Survive Prison Manual. He survived concentration camps, which were way worse than what I was going through. Granted, what I was going through was not pretty, and I talk about it in the book, but it wasn't a concentration camp, thank God. And it wasn't just like his experience putting mine into important perspective, but also his whole system of therapy in response to this meaningless existential dread and despair that was experienced by every single prisoner who suffered concentration camps, to find meaning even within that experience and to survive that experience by finding meaning in it, personal meaning, was really impactful for me as I was going through my own experience. But then otherwise, to this day, humor has played also a huge role in me being able to confront this bummer of an experience that I have in front of me, or behind me. And one book that I read and I just was in it was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Because what an escapism. All you need is a towel and you can just go anywhere and hilarity will ensue. And that actually helped me when I was in a particularly bad cell situation. So in prison, there are 2 kinds of cells that I was in my prison. There was either a 5 or more person cell, because it depended on how many people were in the prison, they might add more to your cell. So it typically was either 5 or more, or there was a 2-person cell. And I would happen to be in a 5-person cell at the time, which is not the kind of cell you want to be in because there's a lot of turnover. And whenever a new prisoner comes into the cell, it completely changes the social dynamic of the cell. And I happened in that moment to be in a cell with 2 very violent individuals who, on the flip of just any little thing could trigger them and send them off. And so I spent a lot of time just sitting on my bed trying to be invisible. And Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy really helped me through those months that I was living in that scenario.
She is also a stand-up comedian.
Yes. Yeah. So, Bash on people know this because it's really here that I've actually felt safe to explore that side of me, which, again, I can't actually thank you all enough for making that space for me, because I feel like now today I do get platformed to tell stories about criminal justice reform and all of that, but it tends to be, again, kind of bummer. And it's really nice to have an opportunity to explore my life and my experience through the lens of the absurdity of it and finding humor in it, which has been really important for my healing. And I think any comedian would recognize that. It's just the comedians that you hear about, the bad thing happened to them before you ever heard about them. And so I feel like that's the only difference. This is the bad thing happened to me and you guys heard about it, and now I want to become a comedian, and they're like, no! And I'm like, no. Yeah.
By the way, there's a rock festival about 150 feet away.
Yeah, so if anyone can recognize the tune, you get more wine.
Yeah. The 5 o'clock act has begun. Your willingness to give people the benefit of the doubt is one of the things that really, truly amazes me about you, even in the face of all that you've gone through. And that carries a certain amount of risk, but you have been extremely generous in how you review or how you view people who come at you and you don't know what their motivations are, but you have tended to give them the benefit of the doubt. It led to some of the mistakes that you describe in the book.
Yeah, it's really bad. You'll see.
Yeah,
it's really bad.
Not everyone's out for your best interest.
No.
But taken on balance, would this determination to give people the benefit of the doubt, has that served you well, generally speaking?
Yeah, great question. Because I did kind of go to prison because I also gave people the benefit of the doubt. So, again, balancing it out. No, I would say that giving people the benefit of the doubt is largely inspired by the fact that people did not give me the benefit of the doubt. And that a lot of people really immediately just jumped on the bandwagon of viewing me in the worst possible light and viewing me out of context and just not trusting me when I say I was tortured by the police, and they're like, I don't know. So I feel like part of that inclination is coming from the fact that I do not want to do to someone else what was done to me, which was just a denial of my context and my humanity and my good intentions. I think another reason why I'm inclined to give people the benefit of the doubt is because I believe that there are far fewer psychopaths in the world than people might like to think. I genuinely think that most people, most of the time, are trying to do what is in their mind the right thing. Even when they are committing harm, a lot of people who commit harm think that they're doing the right thing based upon their perspective. And a part of that comes from my experience in prison, being around a lot of women who were guilty of crimes, who also had been victims of crimes and had a history. And so their criminal intent was also based upon a whole history of thinking. And, I get into it here, but also I could not believe, and the more I learned about the criminal justice system here in the United States as well, the more I learned about wrongful convictions and met other wrongly convicted people, the more I realized that wrongful convictions are not necessarily the result of bad apples in law enforcement who are gleefully or don't really care whether or not a person is innocent or guilty. They just are framing them and putting them in prison. That does happen, and there are people who are actually very psychopathic within that world, but the vast majority of times someone is wrongly convicted, it's because detectives and prosecutors think they're doing the right thing and just are coming to it from a biased perspective. Knowing that, I feel it is irresponsible not to give people the benefit of the doubt to understand what their good intentions are, even if they are committing harm. And so I'm coming from a place of just actual genuine curiosity, trying to understand why harms are committed, not just to me, but just in general, because I want it. The only way to understand is to see the world clearly for what it is. And I was never really satisfied with the story that was often put towards me, which is just that there are good people and bad people. Good people do good things and bad people do bad things. The end. That doesn't actually give me any information that helps me be an effective agent in the world. How can I be an effective advocate for criminal justice reform if I just say, bad cops, bad cops? That's not how it works. And so I think as somebody who wants to actually be an effective person in the world, I have to give people the benefit of the doubt. And and to finally answer your question, yes, I feel like that has been very, very beneficial to me. Even if it has at times put me in positions of great vulnerability, because I had to learn how to recognize red flags and to set boundaries in that journey of also giving people the benefit of the doubt. I think that's a really interesting part of this book, is like learning how to set boundaries, even as you're building bridges. Because I would say that there are two main through lines, like big relationships in this book. One is with my mom, and that carries throughout. And the other is with my prosecutor, and that carries throughout. And if you don't know already, like, this book kind of culminates with me reaching out and then going to Italy to sit down face to face with my prosecutor and to build a bridge. But in building a bridge, do I expose, and trying to give a person the benefit of the doubt, do I expose myself to harm? That is the sort of crux of the tension between me and my mom as I pursue this course of action.
Let's start steering that way.
Okay.
But I want to start by talking about something I can't remember the page number, 161, somewhere in there.
I'm going to check now.
Yeah.
I have a book right here. 161, sir.
We worked on the audiobook together, so I know this book really, really well.
You also were one of the first readers.
Yeah,
you saw it before it was good.
Very early version.
Yeah.
But you
still like me, too.
Yeah. You talk about these impossible things that you had to deal with.
Oh, my God!
Is it right?
There were such strange questions to ask myself because they didn't sound pleasant or even healing necessarily. It all sounded, impossible.
Yes. Well, talk about...
Well, fuck you, though.
Yeah, I know.
How do you do that?
I know.
Really? Okay, never mind. All right.
I know. It's freaky.
It's a magic trick. Okay.
But you talk about these impossible things that you had to deal with, like restoring your reputation, rewinding your trauma, bringing your murdered friend back to life. There are all these things that were impossible.
Yes.
But you looked at them as puzzle pieces, and I thought that was really, really interesting. Could you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because it led to the decision to, I want to go back to Italy, and I want to sit down with Giuliano Manini.
Yeah. Yes. So you're right. Like, there are lots of aspects of my experience where I have butted up against the impossible, right? Like, it was impossible for me to open my cell door. It's impossible for me to bring Meredith back to life. It's impossible for me to get into your brain and convince you of what is really true. And if you focus on all of the impossible things, you can be pretty devastated. You can feel completely depleted of any kind of sense of possibility in your life. And again, you sort of get wrapped up in this idea of the life that you should be living as opposed to the life that you are living. This idea of like, okay, Meredith should never have been killed, and I should never have been wrongly accused, and nobody should ever even know who I am because I didn't do anything. And so facing all of those impossible realities and sort of notating them, I was able to get stock of what was truly in my control, which were not small things. Like, if I focused on all of the things that I couldn't control, I would have been depressed and helpless and confused the rest of my life. Instead, I found myself asking, well, what can I do? And I kept asking myself that question over and over again. And what was important to me, especially when I found myself pregnant with my daughter, I felt really, really strongly that I needed to be okay, because I did not want this feeling of being trapped under the dark cloud of the most traumatic experience of my life to pass on to her through the umbilical cord. Like, I couldn't bear the idea that I would be bringing a life into the world who who I would inadvertently be passing on trauma to. And so I started to ask myself, well, what is possible? And I had an interesting conversation with somebody. This impulse was a lot of what led me to reach out to Giuliano being my prosecutor, because I wanted to understand why he did what he did to me. And I had this like fantasy in my mind that if I just spent an hour with him, he would realize that I was not a drug-addled, woman-hating sex monster. You know, you tell me after this hour. I felt like that, you know, and I thought that he would like realize it, and then he would like proclaim it to the world, and then so I started this journey, but then I realized, especially after having conversations both with my husband and with this guy named David Zellman, who pointed out to me that if I went to Italy to confront my prosecutor to get something from him, like an apology, say, I was doomed to fail. And instead, I should ask myself if this impulse to go there wasn't a sign that I had something to give him. And once that framing shifted for me, I realized that I was unstoppable. Like, I was truly unstoppable.
It was its own epiphany.
Yeah, it was its own epiphany of like, oh my God, if I am going there to bring something to him, like no one can stop me from doing that. And it was just then realizing what it was that I had to bring that was the question. And, you know, my husband, in the lead up to going, he just asked me every single day. He would surprise me. Like, I'd be brushing my teeth and be like, why are we going? And I'd be like, you know, and then I would like say, and then, you know, he would come around the corner and and it would always change. I would change in my mind. And I was trying to figure out like, what do I have to offer this man? And then you'll find out when you read the book. So.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because it really is like the last third of the book. And this all started in 2019. Amanda was asked to go to Italy by the Italy Innocence Project to give a speech on trial by media, which she had been through a trial by media like nobody else. And it was during this speech that for the first time she spoke out and actually recognized Giuliano Menini's humanity. And out loud in public, and that was the big takeaway. That was what, oh my God, you actually said, I want to sit down with my prosecutor. That was the lead story. But before we get to that, I want to ask about trial by media.
Okay.
Because, of course, being a member of the media myself, that fascinates me.
And me too, yeah.
Yes. And it was easy to see how that topic itself, which you addressed very eloquently in that speech, got lost in the shuffle. But now you're out talking about this book to the freaking media.
Yes.
They were the ones that would take whatever salacious rumor came out during the trial that Menini created out of whole cloth, and they would just fire hose it out to the public. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is, in this book promotion that you've been doing, has anybody thought to talk about that aspect, the aspect of how the media will just absolutely latch onto something and make it true just by repeating it?
It is so funny that you bring that up, because no one in the media wants to talk about that part. It's actually really funny now that you mention it, that I'm trying to think of like any, maybe like a podcaster or two, but like, you know, I've been on Good Morning America, blah, 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 and
nobody's copped to it.
No one is copped to it, and certainly no one's ever apologized to me for that kind of treatment. I do think you're right that media people are fascinated by it, and I do think that the latest sort of generation of content creators and media people are really, really interested in this topic of like, oh, do we have to think about how our story is going to impact the source when we're telling it, and what does it mean? Like, first of all, media is in a state of crisis. If you're not in media, maybe you don't know this, but like the economics of media don't make sense anymore. No one wants to actually pay for media anymore, and which means that media creation has become cheaper and cheaper, which means that it's turned into a lot less investigating and a lot more guessing and having opinions, and a lot of more recycling of other people's material. And I think that was kind of the crux of what was going on in 2007, 2008, 2009 when I was on trial, is no one could afford to send their own reporters to go investigate a case anymore. Instead, they just took what was being reported locally and they just took it for its word and then recycled it and re-reported it around the world. And so people were taking Italian tabloids and putting it on CNN and acting like it was a real story. And ultimately the economics of it were not so much what was true that was getting paid, but what was scandalous, what was getting people's attention. Because again, the economics of it is not, are you paying for this content? It is your attention captured by this content so we can sell you ads? And so the most scandalous, outrageous content was what rose to the top. And the journalists who wrote scandalous content the quickest, without doing their due diligence to actually look into whether or not anything that they were reporting was true, were the ones who were getting financially rewarded. And that is the vicious cycle of how the sausage gets made. And I do think that like media professionals are now in a state of crisis. I mean, it's even worse now to the extent that there's so much competing for our attention. TikTok is competing for our attention. Like, media is trying to earn its place in your brain, and they're having to compete against kittens wearing cowboy hats. Like, how is like the true story that is actually more complicated and difficult to understand supposed to like get through? And I think that that's a crisis that we are all grappling with, even as we are deeply, deeply invested in the truth. I think the most dangerous thing that's happening right now, just between media professionals, is the idea that there is no truth. We're getting to this sort of like postmodern idea that like truth is always up to interpretation, and so there really isn't objective truth about anything. And that is an interesting idea, but also a very dangerous one when it comes to someone being accused of murder or not.
Right.
And anyway.
Well, the genius, I thought, of your trip back to Italy, when you raised the question, I'd really like to sit down with my prosecutor in this speech in 2019. That was what got Manini's attention.
Yes.
He reached out and said, let's talk. And
I reached out and I said, I think the thing that he really, it wasn't even as much the let's talk, it was the, I do not think that you had bad intentions.
Right.
Like I spent a speech talking about how shitty the whole situation was, how bad the investigation was, how horrible and unjust the whole thing was. But then I concluded it by saying, but I do not think that that necessarily means that my prosecutor intended to do anyone harm. And in fact, I believe that he had good intentions. And the idea that a defendant might acknowledge that their prosecutor had good intentions was kind of unheard of, and certainly for him. And he then responded by saying he felt like he was bound by honor to respond to me at that point.
So back to Italy you went.
Back to Italy I went.
Yeah, with your mom in tow, because
Yes.
she said, I am not going to let my daughter go back to Italy.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah. And one of the things that I really admired about this conversation that you had with Manini was that you sought common ground. And there was common ground in that both of you were misunderstood by the media in terms of intention and goals that you had.
Yeah. The media likes to present things in very black and white terms. It likes to sell you a story that you've heard a million times before, which has a villain and a victim and a hero and nothing in between. And so depending on what media outlet you talked to, I was the villain and he was the hero, or vice versa. And he felt very maligned, undeservedly. And I recognized that, and I sought to have a conversation with him that was not based upon something adversarial. Like, we had so much not in common, but we had to have something in common. We couldn't have any kind of meaningful relationship unless we acknowledged something in common. And this happened to be a thing that we had in common that was very meaningful to both of us. The fact that we both wanted to be recognized for who we really were. And he was very, very moved that of all the people in the world who might be inclined to see him for who he really was, it was me, the person who had every reason to not see him for who he really was.
You're a mom now.
Indeed.
Of two kids.
Yes.
And you write about in the book how your eyes were opened by being a mother toward the experience that your own mother had. And it helped open your eyes to a myriad of things that she was going through during all of this.
Honestly, even with Giuliano as well, but I'll get to that part. So being a mom has made me realize that everyone in the world is a toddler, including Giuliano Mignini. And that toddlers are all very simple. They all just have something they need. They need food. They need sleep. They need a change of situation. They need to be loved. I mean, it's really kind of simple. Thanks, girl. She's our nanny as well, so she knows how to take care of people. She's like, the toddler needs her baba. So it's true. And oftentimes when I was having conversations, so I talk a little bit about when I reached out to Giuliano, it was at the beginning, 2019 when I first reached out to him. And I wanted to have an in-person meeting, but then this funny thing called the pandemic came along. And I don't know what you guys were doing during the pandemic, but I was writing letters to my prosecutor and getting to know him. And so there is, I think, one of the things that I found really interesting about this conversation with him is, again, trying to find common ground with him, trying to talk about things that weren't necessarily about the case. I did talk to him about the case, but I also just talked to him about himself, about his interests. He's super into Lord of the Rings, for instance. Maybe you didn't know that. But after...
It didn't come out at trial.
It didn't come out at trial. But interestingly, he says that of all the characters in Lord of the Rings, he really relates to King Theoden. Do you guys know Lord of the Rings? Okay, so yeah, okay, you're like, yeah. So King Theoden is the one who actually is possessed by Sauron, and so becomes weird and evil until his possession is relieved of him from Gandalf. And his niece is named Éowyn. And he said that I was like Éowyn, and one really noteworthy thing about her is her greatest fear is to be trapped in a cage. Oh. So read into that all you want. But yes, so beyond just figuring out, becoming a mom, sort of helping me navigate how to have a conversation with this person, it also, the second my daughter was born, she was screaming and crying because she had just been pushed through a vagina, as any of us would. And I was immediately stricken with this impulse to want to take her pain away from her, to take it upon myself. And I was just overwhelmed by the fact that I couldn't. And so my first words to Eureka were, "I'm sorry." And my mom was in the room with me. And I was acutely aware that feeling that I was feeling right now for my daughter was that feeling that she had felt the entire time that I was in prison. Every single time she came to visit me and had to leave me there, she wished that she could have taken my place. And she couldn't. And what I realized that what my mom had gone through was far worse than what I had. And so, you know, I've always been grateful for my mom because she's always been an incredible mom and always been so supportive of me and so just uplifting of me. But it was in that moment that I acutely understood her pain. And so I understood her pain in following me back to Italy when she did not want me to go. She did not want me to go. But she also didn't stop me from going. She just accompanied me and was there. She was there for me. And it really taught me a lesson about what it means to be a mom. That I cannot control my children. I cannot stop them from becoming the people who they are going to be. All I can do is just be there with them and be there to hold them when they need me.
I have so many questions, and these people have so many questions as well. So I'm just going to have a couple more.
Yes.
And then we'll get to those. You and Chris do a podcast called Labyrinths. Highly recommended. It's great journalism.
Woo! Who said that? Was that you? No. Okay. Okay. Woo.
But in between episodes of the podcast, you do a thing called Who's Right.
It's fun.
It's fun. It's you and Chris.
It's me.
Yeah, gigging, each other over who's right over whatever debate topic you're going to talk about, and a recent
basically what every relationship dreads.
Yeah. But this is recorded for everybody to hear.
For everyone to enjoy.
You did one recently called "Let It Go," and you get into how your public processing of what happened to you is interpreted by the public. And there's a big juxtaposition there because people fly you all over the world to talk about this story because they continue to, there's a fascination around it. Mm-hmm. So you are asked to tell this story over and over again.
In a way, I've made a career of telling the story. Yeah.
And yet you take heat from others who say that any attempt to talk about this ever again is an affront to Meredith's memory.
Yes.
And that you should just shut up, let it go, and move on.
Yes.
But in your conversation with Chris, you were debating this, and I loved your answer when you said, he said, why can't you let this go? And you said, I am letting this go. This is part of the process. Talk about how writing this book. There's a television series coming out this summer.
Yeah. By the way, I'm executive producing this television show as well, and there's going to be 8 episodes. It's going to come out August 14th, and the first 2 episodes are going to come out August 14th. And I've seen up through 6 episodes, and they are fucking good. Yeah. And also devastating. And I'm really sorry for any of you who are claustrophobic because it's incredibly claustrophobic. But yes.
I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, about the fact that you are letting this, it's like kind of the thinking is the only way out is through.
Exactly.
And I think back to the very first time we met, which was dinner at your house. So I reached out to you to see if I could help you because I knew you had a recording studio and I just needed to know anybody on the island who had a recording studio.
As is your thing.
Yeah. And you said,
it's your kink, really.
You said, come on over, have dinner. And we were sitting there at dinner and you said that in these speeches, it broke your heart a little bit every time that you had to stand up there and retell the story of the worst thing that ever happened to you. And you wondered, even back then, 3.5 years ago, if you would ever be judged simply for the work you do as a journalist, storyteller, public speaker. Do you feel like this book and the TV series might be that final sort of hole that you punch through to get to the other side, to where the public curiosity about what happened in 2007 may finally be satisfied?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So just so everyone sort of understands what the premise of this Who's Right episode was, is I was recently reconvicted of a lesser crime relating to my interrogation and some statements that I signed as a result of this interrogation that implicated myself and others in the crime.
That the police wrote for you.
Yes, that the police wrote for me, indeed.
And then you recanted.
Yes, that I recanted, all of that. The European Court of Human Rights ruled in my favor, saying that my human rights have been violated during my interrogation, blah, 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 blah. But, 18 years later, here I am, still wrongly convicted in Italy, which sort of raises the question of, like, am I actually free? And what does it mean to be free, even if you have not gotten to the point of vindicating yourself to the world and everyone's not mean to you anymore, and I am I'm on this journey of, like, finding myself and finding my voice and understanding what happened to me. And a lot of people, in response to, especially in response to this latest verdict, like, I've been fighting this lesser charge for years. And a good friend of mine reached out to Chris, actually, because he was afraid to say it to me. Reached out to Chris and was like, man, like, I see Amanda is really, like, still hurting from this experience. Like, she's still putting herself in a position to be hurt. And I wonder if it's just a better thing to, like, just let it go, just, like, move on, let these people be wrong on the other side of the world, and just forget about it, and just, focus on being a mom. And it was interesting. So the Innocence Network conference was like 2 weeks ago. Innocence Network conference being a conference where all these innocence projects around the world, but it's primarily around the United States, come together into one space and celebrate each other and learn from each other and all of that. And it happened to be in Seattle this year. And so it was the first time that my sister got to attend. My mom always attends with me because my mom doesn't let me go anywhere alone anymore. It's just an ongoing thing now, which I'm cool with. But my sister got to go. She had never seen me give a public talk. She had, you're right, I get flown around the world to give talks about the worst experience of my life. And my sister had never seen it. And she had never met another wrongly convicted person. Like, she had just not been on that journey with me. She had sort of taken all of her pain and then repressed it, as we do. And she accompanied me for the first time. And she told me, as we were, like, sitting down and I was introducing her to people, and she was like, God, I wish the family was here, because they would finally get what it is you're doing. Like, my own family members have sort of wondered why I don't just move on and stop, thinking about this worst experience of my life. And it was only when my sister saw me embedded in the world of other wrongly convicted people that she realized that I had a purpose to that community, to that world, and that my story wasn't just a personal story to me. It was a story that belonged, in a way, to everyone. And the only way that I can successfully tell that story is if I tell it with the truth of a broken heart. That's why every time I go to give a talk, it's never the same talk, because I only talk about what continues to haunt me, what continues to make me very, very sad, what I'm not healed over, so that people understand what it really feels like. And so that they understand that what happened to me is not an isolated incident. It is part of a broader, social construct that we are all implicated in. We are all potentially vulnerable to, but we are all implicated in. And so I think that at this point in my life, I would love to not just talk about the worst experience of my life over and over again, and to be recognized for my writing or my comedy or whatever it may be. But at the same time, I think I'm always going to be informed by my experience in the way that someone who went to get a master's degree in psychology is forever informed by their experience. I studied abroad at the Università of Hard Knocks, and I learned a thing or two, and I'm now kind of an expert in a very specific field. But I feel like I am now in a position where I feel like I can decide how I want to convey that to other people, and that I am not sort of pigeonholed into this bummer tragedy of an experience. And, to your point of like people wanting me to shut up and disappear, one of the hardest things that I've had to deal with since coming home has not been people wondering, did she or didn't she? It has been people telling me that because I didn't die in Perugia, my life and my story doesn't matter. Because my friend, the person next to me, the other woman in the story, Meredith, died in Perugia. She did not survive. And so she is the true victim, and I am only disservicing her memory by telling my story. That has been a really difficult one for me to untangle, because a part of me gets it. Like, fate flipped a coin, and of two young women at the prime of their lives with everything in front of them, I was the one who got to survive my study abroad experience. There's no rhyme or reason for it. I just got lucky. And for better or for worse, my life is forever going to be carrying the legacy of her death. What does that mean? What does that mean for me? How do I find peace with that fact and at the same time feel like my place is not just to bury myself in a grave next to hers or to wear a veil of mourning for the rest of my life? That has been the greatest challenge.
Well, you expressed everything that you learned from this experience and the meaning that it brought to your life so beautifully in this book. You guys are really going to love it. It's just an extraordinary piece of work. And Amanda Knox, everybody.
Find us on Bluesky at amandaknox.com.
At wisecracker.bsky.social.
You can help support our work just by following or subscribing to Labyrinths wherever you listen to your podcasts. And sign up for our free newsletter at amandaknox.com to get the latest on all our work.
Labyrinths is brought to you by Knox Robinson Productions. This episode was written and produced by us. Our managing producer is Andre Sapp, our assistant producer is Charlie Darnell, and our theme music is by Josh Budo Carp.